Welcome to Tommy Solo's Famous Friends. This is another episode of The Singers, and this time I'm very happy to have with us the illustrious careered and awesome singer-songwriter, Greg Godovitz. Welcome back to the show, Greg.
Nice to be back, Tommy.
Yeah, well, it is my pleasure. So, when we talked before, we talked about your career with Fludd and with Goddo, but we really didn't talk much about the art of singing. So, I want to know, what got you interested in singing in the first place?
Well, I grew up in a house of music. My mom did some singing on the radio in World War II. And, she was always singing songs around the house. My aunts there was a lot of that going on. And then, my older brothers, they were into Elvis and Pat Boone and Ricky Nelson and all that stuff. That was a little before my time. But then when my brother brought home the Beatles album, that was, the light bulb went off. I remember looking at the cover with the Robert Freeman famous shot of them half in silhouette. And I remember looking at their hair and thinking, they look stupid. My brother dropped the needle on the groove, and It Won't Be Long came on. And that was the beginning. It was like a light bulb going off right in your head going, hey, that's what I want to do for the rest of my life. They'd had all these other great bands, Roy Orbison and, Gary Lee Lewis and all that stuff. All of a sudden, here was a band that was my band. I think they liked them as well, but I just took over the albums and I just became a Beatle maniac. But I remember, my dad's old rusty Studebaker, we'd be going out and I would be singing harmonies, just listening to somebody on the radio, picking out the harmonies in a song. And I used to have fun with Beatles songs because you always think of all the Beatles songs as having great three-part harmonies. Not the case. Some of them were done, individual, some as a duo, some as a trio. I used to enjoy grabbing a Beatles song where it was just one of them singing and doing the harmony part that they easily could have done but didn't. And I guess that's where it sort of took off. And then I was lucky enough to meet Brian Pilling, who became my friend in Fludd, him and his brother. And I was the third voice in the three brothers, I was doing all the high harmonies. When you hear those old Fludd records, all the high stuff is me singing it. Brian and Ed, they did the roots and thirds, and I took over the high stuff. So we've always sang harmony stuff. That changed for me and Goddo because when Marty Morin was drumming, we could sing together because we weren't strong as lead singers. But then when Marty quit, Doug came in and he sort of had a raspy voice. So the harmony aspects of Goddo sort of got pushed to the side. But originally, we were doing harmony vocals too. I love singing harmony. That's what I'm doing now with my band.
What's interesting to me when you mention the Beatles vocals, I was always fascinated by John Lennon singing under the lead vocal instead of a third or fifth above,
Oh, that's a great thing to mention. You usually think of a third harmony or even weird ones like, a seventh harmony or a fifth harmony as being over top. And Lennon was a master of those third or fifth harmonies that were underneath the lead vocal. And that's what gave the Beatles a very, very distinct sound because I don't think, maybe the Everly Brothers were doing that similar sort of thing. And of course, and then their brothers, so they got that going for them as well. But that's a good point. John always had those really quirky harmonies. I think that's where David Crosby from Crosby, Stills and Nash and the Byrds, where he got a lot of his early incentive, was finding those really strange chords with your voice and then adding it because they had, three or four guys that could sing in the Byrds. So he would add like a really weird dissonant harmony. And it's part of what made their sound. I think it's a very clever thing.
Well, if you listen to the Eagles cover of Seven Bridges Road and you isolate all of the 5 different vocal harmony parts on their own, some of those parts just sound god-awful, But when you put them all together, the dissonance just has a really nice blend to it, somehow. It's like a piano. Like they say, a proper tuning for an 88-key piano has got some deliberate dissonance built in.
Yeah.
Yeah,
see that.
Yeah, so you had some pretty awesome influences vocally there, and at the risk of repeating myself for the umpteenth time, that really was a golden era for vocal groups, etc. So now you start out playing in high school, and you're with Fludd, touring extensively and traveling, and then the same thing with Goddo, like you say in your book, Travels with My Amp. A lot of travel, a lot of wear and tear. So have you done anything over the years to preserve your voice?
Absolutely nothing. Never. But Ed and Brian and I went to a guy in Hamilton back in the Fludd days. His name was Ed Johnson. He was a vocal coach. And we got his number somehow. Because especially Brian Pilley, he was always into like finding out more about how and why you do this. I was a bit more organic, and I think Ed, to a lesser degree, was probably a bit more like me than even his brother. But Ed Johnson, I remember the three of us went in and we sang something like This Boy, a cappella.
Mm.
And he looked at us and said, you guys don't need me. You guys sing like birds. And that was the end of our formal training. Apparently, I was never singing from my diaphragm. That's what he was trying to teach us. We'd already had too many things that we'd learned incorrectly to, at that stage, change it, which would probably compound itself later with throat problems and stuff. I mean, Ed Pilling developed nodules on his vocal cords. Not good for a lead singer.
No.
But I remember he had one of those Etch-a-Sketch kind of things where you wrote on it and then you could lift up the plastic paper to make your because he couldn't talk for a couple of months, which was great because I used to argue with him like crazy. He couldn't shut me up, He'd write on that Etch-a-Sketch, why don't you shut up, and I'd rip it up and go, no, I don't have to. But for some reason, I never had that problem. Now, I remember coming back from an extended trip I took to a number of countries, including Egypt and England and Greece and that, back in the day when I got some royalty money that was pretty bloody good. And I thought, okay, well, now I'm going to go see the pyramids and the Colosseum and all that stuff I always dreamed about. But I came back and we were starting an American tour a week later. And we went up to the Roxy Theater where we did our live album in Barrie for 2 nights of rehearsing on stage while the theater was closed. And by the next night when we started the tour, I completely blew my throat out. We started the tour at Harpo's, which is a huge event space in Detroit, in the seedier part of Detroit, if you can imagine. And I was like drinking hot liquids and gargling and spitting up blood. And that's how I started the tour. And it didn't get any better.
And we'll be right back after this.
I mean, I could croak my way through the sets every night, but literally would be in the bathroom afterwards spitting up blood. Blood belongs in the inside of the body, So.
Yeah, it's interesting how when you're out there and it's your living, a lot of people think, oh, rock stars, it's all just champagne and caviar and limousines and so on. But if you've got the flu, or in my case, I had to go in and record a lead vocal in studio in 1983 with tonsillitis, and there was no other choice. That's when the time was booked. And if you've got a gig and you're getting paid, you can't say, I'm going to call in sick today and I expect to get my sick pay.
No. I mean, I just had a call from a guy today that saw us play last week up in Bracebridge, and he'd seen me the day before in Huntsville at an in-store. And he said, you were on your last leg yesterday. What was your gig like? I said, nobody knew. He says, well, you could hardly walk. And I said, yeah, nobody knew. I mean, I'm not looking for any pats on the back, but that's, like you said, that's what you do. You're booked and you have a show, and people who bought tickets, give them the show, And afterwards, if it hurts a little bit, then you deal with it yourself. But I mean, you're right. People all have this preconceived notion of what that life is like. But they don't quite understand that the 2 hours on stage are the highlights of your day. And the other 22 hours of traveling and sitting around and not sleeping and eating poorly, those are the realities,
Yeah, and for a lead singer too, I mean, I know that even at my level, at one point, we'd be up in Kirkland Lake or someplace, and they'd want to interview us on the radio at 7 a.m.,
Oh, yeah.
you gotta You didn't get to sleep till 3 a.m. or later, and then you got to get up at 6 to be at the radio station for 7 for your interview, and you got to be in your very best, most professional behavior, and then somehow you got to make it through the gig later on that night.
When I did my book tour, I guess it was 2011 when Travels with My Amp came out.
Editor's note, Greg's always got a lot of stuff on his mind. Just a quick correction. Travels with My Amp was released in February of 2002. It is still widely available, and you can get it from Amazon within a couple of days at any given time. It's a really good read. You should check out Greg Godovitz's book, Travels with My Amp. Now back to the show.
We did the guy from the record company and myself, we did a national promo tour, and I brought a guitar with me, and literally after a few days, he couldn't keep up with me. I would be up all night, get an hour's sleep, get up, have a shower, grab my guitar, go to breakfast television in whichever city we were in. And he would go, and I'm not putting him down for this because I was used to it. He was not. I say, we got to go to the state. He says, I can't do it today, man. I just burned the candle at both ends last night. But I was so used to it that you could make it do, and then you catch an hour's sleep on the plane. I never liked David Lee Roth as a singer. I enjoyed his sort of comedic aspect in his interview. And I remember I think the first story I ever read about them was either in an American magazine like Cream or something like that, or Rolling Stone. And he said, anybody in a rock band that thinks that they're going to get a decent 8-hour sleep is in the wrong business. He goes, what you do is you get someplace and you nap for an hour. And then you do what you got to do. And then you have another nap for an hour. You catch them where you can. And I started thinking, that's actually pretty smart instead of just staying awake for 3 days. You catch an hour here and there, and then at the end of the 3 days, you don't fall down for a week, I mean, we all tried to do the Keith Richards thing. Keith can do it for 5 days. Let's see what we could do. And, you do pretty good. You might get 3 days in you without sleeping. But then you realize, well, hang on, Keith isn't the lead singer of the band. No, you are. Mick Jagger's not doing that,
Yeah. No, I remember I started running back in the late 70s because I saw an interview with Mick Jagger where he said that's how he kept his voice in shape in his 40s or whatever, And so I was running. When I was living up in North Bay, Ontario, I was running every day for probably an hour, hour and a half. And then I moved to Toronto, and I tried running on the streets of Toronto, and it just about killed me.
Yeah. It's true, though. I mean, getting some sort of exercise is important because, musicians are intrinsically lazy. I mean, now I was a bit of an anomaly on the road because wherever city we were in, and I'm talking about, not the Canadian cities so much because I'd done them so many times, but the first time we went to the States, and we went to Shreveport, and we went to Houston, and we went to New Orleans and stuff. We'd arrive in town. I remember we arrived in Memphis at 3:00 in the morning, and the guys went to the hotel. And of course, I had our driver, Red, I called him, like Elvis's guy. He says, we're going to book into the hotel. I said, no, man, we're going to Graceland, man. So we went down at 3:00 in the morning, and at the gates of Graceland, Elvis's uncle Vernon was on duty. So we got to hang around with him for a couple of hours, and he was warning us, you boys should get away from those gates because if Elvis's hillbilly cousins come in here, they'd just as soon run you over as look at you. So it was cool. But, then we went back to the hotel, had a couple hours sleep, and came back and got in the line. And then we found out that people had already bought tickets. It took us another 6 hours to actually make it up to the gates of Graceland. But we did it, but I wanted to see stuff, man. I wanted to go to the Alamo. I wanted to go to the Chicago Natural History Museum or the Metropolitan in New York, These are places I always felt that people were paying to go to. And we weren't making a lot of money, but we were paid to be in New Orleans. We were paid to be in Memphis. So who the hell's not going to take it? And all the other guys in the band, and I was saying, those guys, they slept all day. I always thought, what a waste of time, that is. Sleep when you're dead.
Yeah, it's interesting. When I was on the road, I was always trying to find a place to throw a fishing line in the water.
Yeah.
So I wasn't necessarily touring the Taj Mahal, but I was always trying to find something to do. And we'll be right back after this. And I think that goes a long way toward being able to sing. Just keeping the air flowing through your lungs in whatever way you have to do it. It's also interesting to me that you say that you've done absolutely nothing to preserve your voice. It kind of makes me think of some of the most interesting guitar players in the world only use 3 fingers on their left hand, on their fretting hand, and yet they are brilliant in what they do.
Well, Django only needed 2.
Well, yeah, that's true. 2.
I'm down to 3 right now because I got one finger that's completely out of commission. But you know what? It was either quit playing or restructure my playing and learn how to play a different way. And as you've seen, I'm back out on the road again. So I really think that it's the mind over matter with people. I got guys that I've been with on the road. La 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 la. They're doing all this warm up stuff, and they say to me, "Don't you warm up?" And I went, "No. I seem to walk out on stage and open my mouth, and it works. I don't worry about it. Worry is one of the worst things that you can do to anything involving your body and your mind. So I just know that whatever comes out is going to be okay. For instance, we just re-recorded Pretty Bad Boy. We couldn't get the original track for a best stuff we've got coming out. So these guys went into the studio and they got Sean Kelly in there. And of course, Doug's no longer with us. And, they sort of restructured the song and didn't tell me about it. Now, normally I would be livid about that. But I went in and I said, so here I am. What am I listening to? They said, well, we're going to play it for you. Then we'll talk about it. And it came on. And it reminded me of the first time I heard Pretty Bad Boy because the guys at that time brought in a couple of disco producers. And I said, no, you're not letting these guys touch my song. But what they did to it, they turned it into a hit record. And I knew the minute the song kicked in, I knew it was a hit record. And this time, here I am, 72 years old, and redoing the vocal. And then I got Drew Winters from Segarini's band came in to redo his piano part from the original. And he said, is this the old vocal? And I said, no, I did it last week. He goes, this is you now singing this? And he says, you sound better now than you did on the original. I said, well, I was stoned on the original. Of course, I didn't sound as good. But now we're not stoned, So I don't know. Whatever works for you. That's the way I look at it. Some guys swear that, warming up for 2 hours, doing scales and stuff is going to help. Well, if it helps them, fantastic.
Well, it's interesting. I had to take some voice lessons when I was in Toronto, I think around 79. I blew my voice out because I had never been the main singer in the band until then. And after a few months, I lost it. And so I took voice lessons from this woman, Rosemary Burns, in Toronto. And I never really got much out of the technique that she was trying to teach me. What I really got from all of it was that you need to look after yourself physically and mentally and keep yourself properly hydrated, whether that means like using a room humidifier when you sleep at night or whatever. And confidence goes a long way. And you've really been talking about that for the last number of minutes here, about how you just know that when you open your mouth, the words and the lyrics and the notes are just going to come out and it's all going to be good. So I think that's a huge part of it, is to just make sure that you are looking after yourself physically, not eating all processed foods, whatever, and don't drink too much alcohol, and be confident. Just be confident. Whether that means doing warm-ups ahead of the show to help you get more confidence or whatever it takes, you just really need to be confident.
Yeah, I guess it does. I guess that does factor into it. I just never really think about it. And like I said earlier, I don't begrudge anybody for doing that sort of stuff. Whatever works for you. There are times when, now with my new act, with the Up Close and Uncomfortable show, we've got 3 good singers in the band. So I enjoy doing sound checks now, which I guess in a way is, in the old days, the roadies with Goddo, they would do the sound check because, we just couldn't be bothered. We knew what was going to happen. I know that sounds terrible, but it wasn't because we didn't care. We just knew it was going to be great, so we didn't worry about it.
You were confident in your team, and like you say, you knew what was going to happen, and it was a lot more extra work.
Yeah, we knew when we walked into a hall, everything was prepared. I mean, we had a really, it's like someone once said this, they were talking about me. They said, you know what he is? He's the Ronnie Hawkins of roadies. That's what he is. I mean, you look at the guys that came through our ranks that ended up working. I remember they all came to my 60th birthday party down at the docks, and I said, hey, what are you doing these days? He goes, oh, I'm Paul McCartney's piano tech. And, well, what do you do? He says, I work for Kiss. I do drums for Kiss. And what do you do? I work for Rush. And like all of these guys went on to travel the world with big, huge superstar bands. And they all said, if anybody can work for you for a year, they can work for anybody for a year. Because we were, I was a stickler for this is what we need, this is what we want when we hire you to be with us. And it was like a roadie training camp. I mean, I didn't show them how to do sound or how to mix lights or anything like that. I just said, this is what we expect, and you guys do your job. And they all came out, Alan Henry went on to do lights for Triumph, design their stuff for Triumph.
Yeah, the famous blinding light show.
And Lord Wheaton was with Neil Peart for 22 years. They all started with Goddo.
Well, it's a good idea to have a good team around you, that's for sure. Before we hit record on this conversation, you were mentioning that when you were doing your online video stuff, you always had a tech with you. It's really important. And, a number of years ago, I had Walter Rossi reach out to me with some positive comments. He had heard one of my songs on the radio in Montreal, and what he said was, love your voice, blah, blah, blah. Bottom line, you've got to get the very best people around you that you can. And I took that to heart. And ever since, I've always insisted on having people that I thought were better than me in the band.
Oh, totally, man. I was the sales manager for Randall Amplifiers for a while. For a couple of years, I brought them into Canada from the States. And I surrounded myself. I said, look, I'm the only guy working it in Canada. I want you to give me the designation of national sales manager. And they said, you're the only guy. I said, then I'm the national sales manager. I said, I want it on my business card because I'm going to hire. I can't do the whole country. It's fun to fly around and stay in Hilton's all the time, but I can't do the whole country. So what I'm going to do now for you is I'm going to hire the best guys in the business, in the amplifier business. And all of a sudden we had a hit selling product coast to coast. And that was because I wasn't afraid to get a guy with 20 years experience as a sales rep, because I knew my thing was I'd walk into a music store in Winnipeg or Regina and somebody would start playing Sweet Thing. So my job was half done the minute I walked into the store. It was easy to sell these guys amps when they already like what you do. But I was never afraid of hiring the best guys. That showed me that you weren't afraid of what they brought. Now, eventually the company let me go. And within a year, they were out of business in Canada. I mean, you needed somebody there to keep the wheels in motion,
Yep.
What I'm trying to say is that having a bit of self-confidence or a lot of self-confidence isn't a bad thing. I mean, you don't go around screaming it on stage. I mean, I wouldn't do that now, but we're in an interview situation. Some people are going to get what I'm saying. Other people are going to go, this guy's an egotistical idiot. Personally, I don't care. After 60 years in this business, I feel almost qualified to be the curmudgeon-y old veteran and say whatever the heck he wants to say. Your turn.
Oh, okay. I thought I lost you for a second. So I know that you don't personally worry so much about vocal technique, but if I were a young up-and-coming wannabe singer, would you have any advice or tips for me as to how to get into singing? I mean, on a professional level?
Well, I mean, first of all, if you want, if you don't have to be in a copy band, start writing your own songs to sing. Because if it's your song and you're singing it and you invented it, well, you're the guy that set the bar. But there's nothing wrong with, I have no problem really with tribute bands and stuff. I mean, sure, if that's how you're making a living by being in a Beatles band or a ABBA band or whatever, that's great. First of all, you're probably doing great songs. That's good for your own songwriting. And you can't beat the Beatles or the Beach Boys or ABBA or those bands for great vocal bands. So you're practicing all the time. But the trick is to get out as much as possible and sing. Go to jam sessions and sing in front of people and build your confidence and take advantage of the situation where, okay, this isn't a really overly important career gig, but we got an opportunity here to maybe run down a brand new song. If we're doing 4 sets tonight, we can run it down a couple times at least and start working on new material. That's what Goddo did. I mean, when we first hit the road, we had 15 songs. And I'll always remember the guy, his name was Lucky. He was the bouncer at Duffy's in Hamilton. And he actually talked like this. He said, "I'm Lucky. I'm in charge here. You guys will do 40-minute sets. You will take a 10-minute break. You will not do any drum solos." So we walked on stage, Gino and Marty and I looked at Marty, I said, "Well, you know what to do, right?" Marty plays a 10-minute drum solo. And then that's what we kicked off our week with. And then the place went nuts. And I said, "Well, now that we know who's really in charge here." So, like bend the rules. I'm in my office right now, and somebody gave me the front page of the Toronto Star when we did that big show at C&E Stadium with Aerosmith and Johnny Winter and Ted Nugent. And we were on second. I think we were on at noon. And there was 50,000 people. Even when we went on, there was 50,000 people there. Nobody knew us from Adam. Just a few people in Toronto knew us. And we had that song, Drive Me Crazy, and the catch was Feel It, I Know It, the Time Is Right. And I'm yelling it at them. And there's a couple thousand people doing it, but there's 50,000 people. I said, "Hey, you know what? You stink. And you stink." And I'm pointing at 50,000 people and screaming at them that they stink as an audience. And I said, "If you're going to go to sleep, so am I." So I laid down on the stage, stopped playing. It's only guitar, bass, and drums. Gino and Doug are looking at each other like, what is he doing? But all of a sudden, you could hear a roar start to go up. And then I leaned up on my elbow and I said, "Well, now that we're all awake, let's see if they can hear you in Etobicoke." And they all did it, and we got an encore. And they actually mentioned in the newspaper that they didn't know who I was. They said, frustrated by the audience's lack of involvement, the lead singer of Goddo started yelling at them that they stink. And I just didn't care about stuff like that. I just remember we walked off the stage, and Michael Cole from CPI was standing on the stage, and the roar kept getting bigger and bigger. And let me tell you, when 50,000 people like it, it's a really nice feeling.
Editor's note, CPI stands for Concert Productions International, which was a huge force in the entertainment business in Canada right up until the mid-90s. In fact, for a while, they had almost exclusive access to Maple Leaf Gardens, etc. All right, let's get back to the show.
Right after us, the Ramones came on for the first time, and they lasted 2 songs. I always felt terrible for them because they shouldn't have been on that show anywhere because they weren't a heavy rock band. And there's a great picture of the 4 of them giving the finger to that same audience I was just screaming at 10 minutes earlier, but they didn't last very long. It goes 2 ways. You can either be swallowed up by them or you can spit them out.
There you go. Yeah, well, you know what, Greg? I don't want to take up your whole day. I know you got a lot of stuff to do today, but I do want to thank you so much once again for taking the time to do this with me. And until next time, cheers.
Always nice talking to you, man. No, you're a good guy. You're a good musician, and you got your stuff together. And the fact that you're out here, hyping other people. I mean, let's face it. I don't do as many interviews now as I did back in the day when we were doing them every day. But it's still nice when people take the time to go, yeah, we hear you're still alive. What are you doing these days?
Oh, Speaking of that, just one more quick thing. How are we doing with the Idiots Trilogy Part 4?
I'm working on it. I mean, I keep writing. This book, there was no hurry to finish it. I started the book at the beginning of COVID. Now, the strange thing about it, and this is just completely by happenstance, I wrote at the beginning of the book this huge scream that goes on for about 4 pages. And then you flip a page and it says in really tiny letters, all joined together, we are all going to bleep, bleep, die. And that's how the book starts. And I dedicated the book originally. I always dedicated it to someone, a friend of mine that's passed or a relative. And I dedicated it to my dear friend Kelly J from Crowbar, who just passed away. And we got very close when I was living in Calgary. We used to play with him all the time. I now have 56 names of people I know underneath Kelly's name on the front page of the book. So my little prophecy about how we were all going to die is strangely, in a way, like all of these friends of ours, for whatever reason, old age, drugs, abuse, COVID, sunstroke, who knows? There's a lot of people out there that we're not seeing anymore. But my advice to anybody that I know, stay out of my new book.
All right, Greg. You have a good one, my friend.
Thanks, Tommy.
Well, that was fun. Now, here's the thing. Greg and I tried to record this interview about a week before we actually ended up finishing this, and there was a problem with the audio quality, so I had to redo it with Greg. But there was one part at the very beginning that was so funny, we both agreed that I should share it with you in this episode. So, before we do the usual thing where I play a song from Greg's collection, here is the introduction from the original attempt at doing this interview, and I just think it's hilarious. We will follow that with Goddo and Sweet Thing. Enjoy. Welcome to Tommy Solo's Famous Friends. This is yet another episode of The Singers. This time, I'm very happy to have with us legendary singer Greg Godovitz. Welcome back to the show, Greg.
Thank you, Tommy. And I'd like to point out something that's so obvious it's ridiculous, if you don't mind.
Why, certainly.
We're not friends, okay? Don't start spreading that around.
Sting.
Tommy Solo's Famous Friends is a one-man production, meaning that I've done all the work, including recording, editing, guest acquisition, etc. And hey, here's some news. We've just recently joined forces with 519 magazine, so you can check out my interviews there as well. The theme song for Tommy Solo's Famous Friends is a clip from my original composition, The Burn, all rights reserved. If you enjoy the show and you'd like to help us keep it going, why don't you click on the Buy Me a Coffee link in the show notes. Hit the like button, subscribe, all that stuff. We really appreciate it. You can find me on Facebook and Instagram. And until next time, cheers.